Sure you guys couldn't get closer in?
Nobody cares.
Mike Phillips. He was a real nice guy.
I don't know that, I don't think he's coming in today, that's why I'm here. He is in, where'd he go? He went somewhere.
Okay.
He's not here. Yeah. He's a classmate of mine. He went to Army, I went to Navy. Same time.
He only lives about a mile from me.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. This is not gonna be on the video, so we can get started a little bit early, and we can get on to Lew's presentation. My name's Gary Francis. I'm the president for one more month of the Veterans Museum, the board, and welcome. Thank you for coming. One thing I want everybody to remember is, if you would please, to deactivate your electronic device so that they don't go off in the middle of Lew's speech.
Should I do that too?
It won't matter if it goes off in the middle of my speech, so it doesn't matter. But. And also, if you haven't already, please make sure you sign in on the visitor's log, either down here or upstairs. And you're certainly welcome to take a look through the library after through the museum and the library if you want to. But the museum after you're done. We have a new Battle of the Bulge display up in the our forefather, what we call our forefathers area. That's the area there right inside the first room that we change periodically. So please get involved with that. And we want to make sure we thank our sponsors. The city of Broomfield is a great sponsor. They provide this building for us and the heat and the light. We put a new sign up front in case you hadn't noticed.
It's awesome.
You can almost knock your eyes out. You can see it from Westminster, I think. So we're good. So today, Lew Moir has agreed to make a presentation to us. And he's going to talk about his life in the Air Force and the things that he saw. And he's not going to make up too much stuff, he told me, but maybe a little. And so I don't think, does anybody really need an introduction to Lew? I'll let Lew do. I'll let Lew take over here.
They don't.
Everybody knows Lew.
No, we don't.
Yeah, you know? Okay. Well, you can talk a little bit about yourself then, Lew.
Well, they got plenty on that thing that Mike wrote. Is this,
Yeah, you have a bio there in front of you.
is this working?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, at any rate, well, as you can see on this rather elaborate bio that Mike did, the uniform I'm wearing kind of sets what my age is. Some of you may not recognize silver tans, but I think Mike puts that one on there because it relates closer to the Army.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so I was going to talk a little bit about the B-52 and why it's been around for so long and why it's going to be around so long. And then and how I happened to get there, and then somewhere along the line, I might have a story or two. I don't have too many of them. At any rate, I started out as a fighter pilot, and it's what political things do to you. I was, the Eisenhower administration decided that since the Soviets had not disarmed after the war and had their full World War II military in place yet, and everybody in Europe, including ourselves over here, had pretty well started disarming, there was no way we could stop the Russian army should they decide to go and take the rest of Europe. So we had to go to nukes. So 600 pilots were taken out of Tactical Air Command and put into Strategic Air Command. If you had more than 1,000 hours, you became an aircraft commander in a B-47. If you had less than 1,000 hours, you went into the back seat as a co-pilot. And that's where I started. And then somewhere along the line, I got transferred to B-52s. So the rest of this talk is just basically about the Buff. And Buff is the big, ugly, you-know-what. Anyhow, this is the number of aircraft built by model. And each model, as it went up, as it was built, had, that's all right, that means somebody went into my house.
That's a $25 fine.
Well, I can't shut that off. At any rate, each model as it went up mean there were significant changes to the models. The most models built were the D and the G, and that'll come to play a little bit later. One of the things about the changing of the models is it was also driven by the budget. An example of that, for those of you who remember the B-29, the B-50 was really should have been a model of the B-29, but Congress passed money for a new airplane, not for enhancements to an existing airplane, and so that's why the military just simply changed the name of what they were doing and continued. Okay, this typical B-52, the C-3, actually the C through F, but F had some big changes, went into in the middle 50s. And it's the E model is basically what I flew. Now the B-52 was designed for survivability, and it was designed by individuals who were familiar with World War II. And if you see, the first contract that was let for the B-52 was in 1947. That's the same year that the B-47 actually first flew. And so think about it, 2 years after World War II, we were into this vintage of stuff. So every model after that, the engines got a little more powerful, and there were more modifications to the aircraft, ECM equipment, nav equipment, and the rest of it.
ECM.
These,
ECM.
pardon? Electronic countermeasure.
Thank you.
Sorry if I use an acronym on occasion.
I'll call you on it.
This is a this is a GAM 28, is a air-to-ground missile. Our aircraft were modified to carry these. Once they put the clip-in system in the bomb bay of the B-52, it could carry 8 Mark 28 nukes at 1.1 megaton in each bomb, and then there was one of those in each of those missiles. And that's one of the reasons why I always thought that as a young, still in my 20s, as an aircraft commander of one of these things, flying over the United States fully loaded, that I had more responsibility than I ever had after that. During the Cuban crises, they flew 5 airborne alert missions, which were 24-hour missions. And then the rest of the time we spent on ground alert. And regardless of all the different things we say, we in the Air Force believe that the airborne alert is what worried Khrushchev more than anything else that we did. Because if you've got 84 of these basically surrounding his country all the time. Another thing that we could do with this particular one, or they did come up with the ballistic missile to carry, which was the Skybolt, but it was never deployed. And they also had what they called Quail missiles, which you could carry into bomb bay, which theoretically speaking, once you deployed them, it would give the radar image of a B-52. Now, I could never imagine that little thing that was in the bomb bay looking like a B-52, but they decided it did. Why did I go blank?
In that photo, Lou, do you have any recollection, or because you were deployed all over the place, where this photo was taken?
Where that one was
Is that
taken?
Okinawa?
Oh, no, that was somewhere in the States. That would have been taken back in the mid-50s. I really don't know
Okay.
which one. I don't. If you're not familiar with the SAC at the time, there were so many SAC bases along the northern tier of the United States. We used to refer to Highway 2 as being SAC Highway 2, because they started at Loring, went all the way out to Fairchild in Washington. This time we got it. Now, the D model was later modified with the larger bomb bay. The older models had could carry 27 500-pound bombs. But after they modified the D model, it could carry 84, and then 24 more on the wings. And so when Vietnam started, and that Vietnam was the reason for it, and also for painting them black, the mods to the D wasn't done yet. So instead of sending the E models, which I happen to fly, which we trained on conventional delivery, and we trained on formation flying, which was kind of important. We actually had contingency missions for countries down in South America during that time frame. But they didn't send us. They send our airplanes to the boneyard, and they send F models to Vietnam. And they didn't have the training. And as a result of that, on the first mission over there, lead and number 2 ran into each other and basically killed both crews, to include a 2-star general who was in the lead aircraft. So then they changed the tactics to what they call cell formation, and that's basically where you flew in trail, 2-mile separation, and did radar station keeping to keep position. And that'll come to play later also. Another reason for taking the D models, in addition to having more in number, was the fact that the older aircraft, as I said, had been designed earlier, and they had more accurate radar, and they had a new, the old gyro, which was more accurate. So it was better for conventional than the later model, the G and the H were. I might add they're also more survivable, and that the fuel in the wings was all in bladders, which you could control from the from the cockpit. So anyhow, this is what the clip-in system looks like. So this is your C-500-pound bombs on racks that they clipped into the bomb bay. You see a rack, bomb bay with 3 racks in it, and the ones underneath the wings. The wing weapons could be either 500 or 750-pound bombs. If you had 750 in the bomb bay, you'd have fewer of them than the 500. So these were the same bombs that were dropped in World War II. In fact, I think they brought some of them back, and we reused them or took them off of whatever island. The aircraft, again, was designed for high altitude, and that's what these were. Once they were flying in cell, the drops were done off of Leeds mark. In South Vietnam, most of the targets were guided by radar, which we refer to as miscue sites. And that would allow them to make minor corrections to the target at the last minute, because the regular targeting scheme was long and drawn out. A couple of exceptions to that, which I happened to fly both of those missions. There may have been more. One was into North Vietnam. During one of the multiple moratoriums that we had, where you were not authorized to go into North Vietnam, the North Vietnamese set up their SAMs and AAA along the border with Laos, and were having field day shooting at our aircraft flying in Laos. So one night we got a frag order to go into North Vietnam, And we were to go radio silence, lights out, antennas turned aft, and that seemed to work pretty good because we got over North Vietnam without them knowing we were there until after the first load of bombs dropped. Then they knew we were there. One of the reason I happened to fly that mission, actually I was sacked out peacefully, but the general was scheduled to fly. So I get a call in the middle of the night, say, Lew, you're airborne commander, get your backside out on the lead aircraft. And said, yes, sir. So off I went. But they did not start firing at us until the first bomb would have hit the ground. And although I saw they had 100 millimeters, 57 millimeters, SAMs, probably other smaller caliber weapons they were using. Nothing was ever said about this in the press, and it never got into the public, and to this day I've never heard of that mission. And the reason that's kind of significant is that the numbered Air Force commander had previously been fired. Val was his name. He was demoted and fired because he authorized a mission into North Vietnam during one of these periods. So I'm not sure where we got our authority, but we did it. Now this is a look at where the B-52s were parked at U Ta Pao. This is the front two set of revetments. And there's about 5 sets of revetments. The tanker aircraft that were there assigned and the Navy P-3s were actually parked on the open ramp over on the main portion of the base. Now they were flying cell formations. Cell formations were 2 cells, 3 ships each, and for a total of 6. I told you the wingtip story, so no more wing business. That's too dangerous. So a mission on the B-52, each aircraft carrying 108 bombs, that would be, so each mission, that would be 648 bombs we dropped for each mission. We run 10 missions a day, 4 from Guam, 4 from U Ta Pao, and 2 from Okinawa. So if you want to know the number, that's 3,240 bombs per day, 7 days a week, for however many years that we were over there. So I'm quite sure that we killed a lot of bamboo trees. We left a lot of swimming pools. I've had friends visit Nam since then, and a number of those swimming pools are still there. God knows how much other stuff. There was a mission just before I got there, if you remember Quezon, where the restriction was you could not drop closer than 5,000 feet to the encampment, to the Marines. Well, one of the radar operators set his offsets wrong. So actually he dropped at about 2,000 feet out in front of the Marines. The significance of that was that the VC learned very quickly that no bombs were dropped inside of 5,000 feet. They moved inside. So this guy's screw up, if you will. Remember, they dropped on lead, so that meant all 6 of them laid that stuff down. And I guess there were quite a few casualties on the VC side for that mistake that he made. And they never punished the crew for that after they found out the effect. If we look at this, you can see what the routes were for a linebacker too. So that's when the Buff really entered combat. And that's where a couple of other less than pleasant things showed up. So the bombers on the linebacker either came out of Guam or U Ta Pao, and their tankers out of Okinawa. The aircraft out of Guam had to do refueling going in each time. There were some problems associated with this. Excuse me. There were 15 B-52 shot down during Linebacker 2. 6 of them were G models, 9 of them were D models, but statistically, by aircraft type, that was great. There were actually almost 4 times as many D models flying as G models. And at Utapao, the only thing they had was the D model. At any rate, 9 of the bombers were lost the first day. General, I happened to be, by that time I was up in SAC headquarters. General Myers was not a happy camper. He was SINC-SAC. So he called the conventional bomb guys where all of the bomb requests went through and asked for a briefing as to what was going on. He found out that every single person in headquarters working the targeting had never been in Southeast Asia. And I wasn't there for that exchange, but I did brief General Myers a couple of times, and I can assure you, I would not have want to be there. But at any rate, so he said, that get the people who have experience and then come and talk to me, which they did. And they found that folks I was in the data processing business. They had people in the command post, people in logistics, people in personnel. They had all sorts of people with experience, but none of them in the place that would do. Out of that came the discussion that this idea of flying in trail down the same path, and so woe be you if you happen to be number 2 or 3, or worse yet, if you were in the second cell. Because you're flying the same route, making the same turn, and that's who they would shoot at. And that was the case. So they changed the tactics, where they came simultaneously from multiple directions, multiple altitudes, and with that they were able to confuse the enemy radar pretty well. And so for the rest of the days, although they did lose 6 more aircraft, the loss was not as great. And again, we can see the difference between the D model and the G model. Because the G model, there were 2 things they did with the G model that created a bit of a problem. One is they went to a wet wing. On the G model, because of a wet wing, if you punched a hole in the bottom of the wing, the fuel would break the wing off. On the D model with the bladders, that wouldn't necessarily happen. Secondly, they decided that they could save money on the G model by not putting so much electronic countermeasures equipment towards the rear, because if you drop the nuke on somebody, how many people are back there? Well, but in a conventional environment, they're still back there. And so that was another issue, the tactics as well as the technology. As an example, of my individual who later became my ops officer, John Dalton, he was hit twice by SAMs with his D model airplane. He flew it into Udorn and got some additional fuel because he did lose fuel. He did punch some holes in the wing. And then he flew down to Utapao, and then the Boeing engineers looked at it and said, this airplane's not flyable. But
Lou, could you give us how far a distance is it from Guam to Hanoi kind of thing? What's the distance on that? Is that like 1,000 miles or 800 miles?
Quite a ways. I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
Bummer.
How many hours?
And those are typically like 12-hour missions,
Okay. 6 out and 6 back.
something like that.
Why didn't you just fly?
Out of Utapao, our missions were 2.5 hours, and we didn't have a tanker. And I have to tell you, the missions, other than Linebacker, were easier than the training missions. The missions were just kind of a piece of cake, so to speak. Yes, sir.
Why didn't you just fly them all out of Clark or someplace closer where you didn't have to refuel?
That depends on what the country's, the rules of the country are. And,
So they could take tankers, but not bombers, huh?
yeah, right. You
So
know,
some of the tanker support came out of Clark.
they came out of Okinawa.
Well, what the yellow triangle there?
Yeah, oh, yes, also, yes. They did forward deploy to Clark. Yes.
I have a novice question. Can you control how many bombs you drop, or do they all go at once?
Well, we always dropped them all at once, but you could control whether you were dropping out of the bomb bay or whether you were dropping off of the wings.
Last week, the B-52s were bombing in Syria, and the reports in the news are that they hit 75 different targets, and there weren't 75 bombers over there, so
Well, I
you
can-
have to assume that they dropped partial loads on different targets, and those bombs now are
Well, they're smart weapons, and so it's different.
GPS guided.
Now they control each weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of the planes that were shot down, were the majority of crews able to evacuate successfully, or are they stuck?
There were, I forget the number that were lost. Some of them got out and were POWs. And by the way, for the folks that were in the Hanoi Hills, they welcomed them. In fact, they cheered even though their own prison was getting bombed. But they were very happy to see these guys, not because they were happy to have them as prisoners, but because we were finally doing something. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but some of the Navy pilots were around. I don't have it. At any rate, the government, even when we could go into North Vietnam for the Hanoi and bomb Hanoi and Haiphong, they had a 2.5-degree corridor that you had to fly down. This was like a gauntlet. And the North Vietnamese had everything. I think they have kids with slingshots, you know. and so we basically wiped out our F-105 fleet of aircraft just going down that run.
Lou, when I was on Operation Homecoming, at Clark, waiting for my Bill Angus to be released, that I was escorting home to his family, hanging out in the hospital and helping the other escorts with their guys. I met, I don't remember his last name, but he was a Chief Master Sergeant, and he was a gunner. So that would have been a D model, right, in tail gunner?
Well, G models had guns then also.
Okay, so he's manning his 50 cals, and he was credited with a MiG kill before they got shot down by a MiG.
Yeah, that would have been a D if it had the
Chauncey
G's.
was his first name. He's quite a character.
Yeah. Supposedly, two gunners got credit for shooting down MiGs.
Lou,
Yeah.
to Gary's question, is 2,600 air miles
Okay, thank you, sir.
long.
See how well Google works?
Jill knows everything.
I assume that's straight line miles,
Yeah,
but they had to
yeah,
veer
yeah.
away from Philippine airspace
yeah.
to refuel, so it probably added another
Yeah.
300 or 400 miles.
Yep.
What was the crew size for a B-52?
6. You had pilot, co-pilot, radar navigator, who was the bombardier, navigator, electronic warfare officer, and gunner. And gunner.
Was there ever a problem with malfunction on the bomb release, and then what did they do about it?
Yes, there were on occasion malfunctions, and when you did, you brought them home.
Okay.
And then if you landed okay, it went all right. But if you had a bad landing, you better run like heck because, and that happened at I think at Okinawa. I think one of them, and most of the crew got out because they're on their landing. They ended up going off the end of the runway and. The aircraft stopped and they all ran like hell and barely got out of the way before the aircraft blew up.
What was the release altitude for most of the bombs that were dropped, or did you vary the altitudes that you dropped the ordnance from?
Oh, typically it was up around 35,000 feet. That was what was wrong. Same altitude, same track, same turns, dumb tactic.
What was the airspeed of the airplanes at the time? Bomb load.
350
3 something
Not real fast.
knots, that's knots.
knots airspeed.
1.151 statute miles.
Yeah, I'll have to apologize. You know, my last B-52 flight was in 1977.
That's no excuse, Lou.
I don't remember all of those things.
Probably.
Okay, the H model was a step ahead primarily because of the turbofan engines. So they went from the J-57 engine, which had been traditionally upgraded. In fact, during the upgrading phases through the model, the J-57 went from 9,500 pounds of thrust to 13,000 pounds of thrust. But when they went to the turbofan, it was 17,000 pounds of thrust. And because of the wet wings, they also were able to carry more fuel. So the gross weight went up from 450 to 488,000 pounds.
Lou, and I don't know, expect you to know this off the top of your head, but approximately what percentage increase in the range due to the turbofans versus the turbojets?
Well, the H model set a record one time of something close to 12,000 miles unrefueled.
Wow.
But, you know, they cheated. You know, he was full load of fuel. He would climb the altitude, got in the jet stream, and went and flew in the jet stream to do it. But I would say it probably added 2 hours to
2 hours at 400 knots cruise,
yeah.
so that's 800 miles.
So with the H model, with the new engines, there was 102 of them built. Now there's 76 of them still operational today, plus the ones they have in storage, flyable storage. 2 of them have been taken out of flyable storage, refurbished, and back into operations to replace 2 of the H models that crashed. And when we got to the Gulf War, the first aircraft that flew and engaged were the G models. They still had the G models. The older models by that time had been retired. So the G models out of Barksdale with cruise missiles and the Navy off the shore were the launched cruise missiles. And those were the first missiles to hit the targets in Baghdad in Gulf War I. And then the aircraft was used for both standoff with the missiles, and they also did some basically saturation bombing of the regular bombs, mainly along the highway back to Baghdad out of Kuwait, which kind of wreaked havoc on the retreating folks. But between that 91, 92, 90, 91 time frame, the SALT agreement was signed with the Soviet Union. And as a result of the SALT agreement, all the G models were flown to the boneyard, and they had to be busted up. They had to break the wings off, bust the fuselage. It had to be visible from a satellite that the aircraft was no longer flyable. And so the whole G model fleet was gone, as well as some of the H models. And that's what left us today with the size of the fleet that we got. So the subsequent conflicts in Syria and the Second Gulf War, those were H models that were flying that. And again, most of those were with cruise missiles and limited gravity bombs. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Why did they have to be visible a satellite. They were destroyed. I mean,
The Russians?
That was so the Russians could verify that we had actually done it. And that was in the time frame when they started to move away from this issue of allowing the overflight checking of what people were doing, and you had to do it from satellites. So this is kind of a schematic of the J model. And that's the one that's supposed to go through 1950. And they're actually having discussions as to whether they should have it stay longer. There's a couple reasons for why the aircraft would be staying around longer. And that is obviously because of its payload that it could carry, 70,000 pounds of weapons, and the fact that it had two weapons officers, if you will, the radar navigator, so they could handle multiple kind of weapons, and the aircraft would be configured to handle most of those. The other basic things from the H to the J, they got the Rolls-Royce engine, but it's going to remain the same. And the same thrust, same weight, same fuel capacity. But with the new engine, the range or loiter time will be increased by 30%. So they could, I guess, fly forever. I got to tell you, 24 or 26-hour missions with a basic crew is a long time to be up. And by the way, on airborne alerts, we had 2 major refuelings, and each one of those refuelings, we took on 20,000 gallons of fuel. You had to hang on for 30 minutes to get that much fuel transferred.
That's
20,000 gallons, not 20,000 pounds.
20,000 gallons.
about 125,000 pounds.
And that's the reason for the boom rather than the drogue. Because if we had the drogue, we'd be burning it up about the same rate that it's transferring fuel to us.
Your landing gear looks different than normal planes.
Well, it is normal. It's in the fuselage.
Okay.
And
No,
so,
I mean, I'm used to airplanes with 1 up front and 2 in the back.
right. This has got 2 in front and 2 in the back.
That's what I meant.
And then it has outriggers. I don't know if you can see them.
The previous one, the previous
It's referred,
You can see the outriggers.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that used to be more important on the older aircraft because with the flexible wing, which could flex at 32 feet at the end. But the H models, they harden the wing. Again, anybody who flies, if we were flying and they'd say, what kind of turbulence you got? Well, when you were flying, the ones with the flexible wing, we never had more than moderate turbulence. And some of the airliners really got upset with us. We'd say, well, how's the turbulence? We'd say if it's light, or we'd say it's moderate. And then they would hit it, and it's moderate to severe.
So the landing gear, you could rotate?
Yes, because of its size, by the long size rudder was driven by the fact that you had 4 engines on either side, and you had to be able to fly that aircraft with 4 engines out on one side. So you have a big long rudder to deal with that. So to deal with that scenario, you had what we call crosswind crabs. So you could turn the gear up to 20 degrees off. And I only landed once with 20 degrees of crab, but it was very weird because the runway was out the co-pilot's side window and I'm over the grass. So, but it did work well. Yes?
And they had to cut up a bunch of those G models. Did the Russians have to destroy a bunch of their Bears, which is kind of like their equivalent? Did they have to, or
Right.
say that they did?
Theoretically.
Did we verify?
We verified I'm not sure. I never seen a picture of the verified ones. There is pictures online of what the G models look like. Somebody took a picture and you see them all over there, just a scattered piece of junk. Yes, sir.
What was your closest call on a mission?
Closest call for me? Well, probably the closest one is when I'm still airborne, but in a dead stall. When I got my IP check, after I basically passed the IP check, we shot some additional landings, war stories. So the first one we did was a high altitude, where you remained at traffic pattern altitude till the runway went out of sight. Then you drop the power, drop the gear, drop the flaps, air brake 6, and drop like a rock, flare and touch down right at the end runway. That was good. We did that. And by the way, this is Roswell, and it's very windy. So, but the wind is down the runway. So we come in for the next one, and it's a low one, dragging in over the top of the treetops. And a front crossed the field at exactly that time, just as we approached the overrun. And the wind went from a 40-knot headwind to a tailwind. And the airspeed went below 90 knots. And you could do this with a wheel. Well, because it was low, we had a hard landing. If we had been doing that other one, we'd have had a crash. So that was probably the closest one. There was another occasion that was a little bit dicey, where you're coming on a low-level route, dodging thunderstorms. It's an ORI, and we have the EIG on board, sitting between us.
ORI.
Operational Readiness Inspection. Sorry.
And the next EIG,
Inspector General.
oh, okay.
IP check.
Right.
Instructor pilot check.
Anyhow, no, it was the wing type check. Any rate, so here we are dodging the weather, and all of a sudden the cockpit lights up like it's daytime. And I glance at the instrument panel. I got fire warning lights on number 1. And I look out the window, yeah, it looks bad. And I said to the co-pilot, shut down number 1. The co-pilot freezes. So I shut down number 1, and we finished and flew on out and went home. After I landed, the Inspector General, it's the only one that I know that was a decent fellow. He said, you've got an excellent crew, and if I write that co-pilot up as I should, you would all be punished. And says, I'm going to let you take care of him. And he didn't write us up. But that was a bit hairy, shutting down an engine and trying to fly in that environment. But other than that, there was a couple other incidents like that. So back to the J. Let's see, I don't think I have anything exciting. So now,
Let me ask you, go back to the J. I have a question I thought you were going to answer. These dual nacelles with the Rolls-Royce turbofans in them, are there 2 more?
yeah, there's still
it's still
it's 8 engine, right,
Okay.
right, and they still have the same thrust, about 17,000 pounds of thrust. The Rolls-Royce was picked. Obviously, it's a commercial engine, and it's in very many of the commercial aircraft, and expected to be around for a long time. And keeping this configuration made the overall conversion multitudes of times easier. You didn't have to rebuild the wings and a lot of the rest of the structure of the aircraft.
So the basic wing structure would still be there.
Right.
It's a modification of the H model.
Right. And if you put the bigger engines like they have on the 700 series airplanes, and so now you're talking about ground clearance with the gear. A couple other things about the J model. It's getting a new radar, and the new radar will be the same radar that's going into the FA-18 of the Navy's. And because of that radar, they no longer need the FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar.
We're getting you trained.
So that there will be a new nose on the aircraft. And then there's a significant upgrade to the nav system and to the electronic warfare system, and supposedly a glass cockpit. But the pictures of the glass cockpit I saw, it only included the engines. The rest of the instruments were all steel round dials.
They still have a gunner?
The gunner is gone. They got rid of the gunner, still back with the G model. The reason for getting rid of the gunner, well, you don't have too many guys to shoot at. A gun that's synchronized at about 1,500 yards is not much good at an airplane that's shooting at you from several miles. So, and in the first Desert Storm, the Iranians picked up on where the aircraft was based on the signal from the gunnery radar. So they just did away with it. And with this new one, they might get rid of the electronic warfare officer by virtue of the fact that most of the electronic equipment for this countermeasures are controlled by computer anyway. And so man involvement, it does have a couple of bubbles on the top, and that's for satellite purposes. So there's a lot of use of satellites. So this is a list of some of the weapons they can carry, do carry. Basically, the aircraft can carry anything you can launch from the air, it can carry, and they can be trained to handle these. And you also notice there's some Navy weapons in here. Cover that a little bit in a minute when we talk about missions. And as I said, the payloads remain and the fuel capacity remains the same in the later aircraft. And you can see there's two different kinds of rotary racks. They're the same kind of rack, but they're different kind of missiles on them. And whether something's loaded on a rack in the bomb bay or whether it hangs on the wing also depends on its size. Okay, some of the missions. Well, they remain, their nuclear mission remains basically the same. Deliveries are both high and low altitude. Low altitude missions, by the way, are 500 feet. Then you pop up to 2,500 feet to release your weapon. And I ought to tell you something about some of the crack crew members. We had a target in one of the Soviet bloc countries. My electronic warfare grandparents lived in that town.
In that town.
In that city. And I'm sure there were a lot of other ones like that also. And of course, the missile launches and the rest of it. And we can also, in the conventional, we have the standard ones stay along, as well as later laser and satellite guided weapons. And by the way, the reason that we went from high altitude to low altitude tactics is primarily because of Soviet defenses. And you will read things about when we built the B-70, the Soviets built the big MiG-25 to counter the B-70. But in their infinite wisdom, that was a high altitude airplane, so they did not have a radar that had a look down, shoot down. So we went down below. And the Soviets, being what the Soviets are, we canceled the B-70 program. Well, they couldn't cancel the MiG-25. I mean, it was going, and they just don't make changes like that. So they went for years still building MiG-25s without a look-down radar, for whatever reason. Nowadays, with the conventional weapons, they can be guided by lasers, and the laser can be in any number of places, to including a spotter on the ground. And includes anti-ship and,
Harbor binding.
pardon?
Harbor binding. What is, can you describe that?
Harbor mining.
Harbor mining?
Mine harbors.
Harbor mining, yeah, you have basically mines, and they're Navy. You lay them across the entryway to a harbor. In fact, we did a NATO exercise when I was still flying. We took off from Carswell, from Fort Worth, flew to Pease, New Hampshire. The Navy came from the nearest Navy base, wherever it was, loaded mines on the aircraft. We then flew across Atlantic and laid mines across the coast of the Netherlands, which is what the exercise was. A little vignette to that, there was a observation ship that we were supposed to contact on the way in, but we called them on the radar and the crew couldn't get a hold of them. So I suggested to the pilot, do a 360 and buzz them. I gave him a license to steal. I think he went across that ship at about 100 feet. They were on the air like that.
Lou, what altitude do you mine from a B-52? Because I was thinking, we mined Haiphong Harbor, we were, a couple hundred feet above.
Yeah, I'd say about 500 feet. Yeah.
But you guys didn't do Haiphong Harbor.
I'll tell you another war story. Red Flag. Some of you may have been familiar with Red Flag. Well, a very embarrassed F-4 pilot is around somewhere. So we had to fly targets. And so I got one of my crews out there flying targets. And this guy who's supposed to be looking for him from his F-4, he calls back and it says, he can't spot this B-52. And the radar guys back at the site said, he's below you. It turned out he was down to about 100 feet. Now he got in trouble, and as squadron commander, I got in trouble. Well, not very much trouble, because we enjoyed it immensely. But they did have to say like something cross. Well, what the heck are you doing? Because you're violating the rules. And then there's the heavy lift support. I haven't talked about those, but the Air Force Systems Command has one, and NASA typically has one to do heavy lifting for whatever they happen to be testing, like things like the F-15 and several other different missile types that if it's big and heavy, they haul it out with that. Okay.
No, we had a picture, but then it went away.
Or is it?
There we go.
Okay. So this is just indicated where they're looking. These are building actually cruise missiles on them. And as I said, they designed so it can handle anywhere from 1 to 12 weapons, depending on what it is on each pylon. Nowadays, they don't fly formation like they used to fly. Typically, you'll see 2 ships go out at a time. Yes?
Given what I think the Chinese invested a lot in, which is interference with our electronics and guidance systems, can one of these guys go in with inertial guidance if they have to?
Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the guidance systems we trained with in my squadron was it was basically sitting in the cockpit somewhere, and they calibrated when we were parked over a surveyed spot. Then we'd fly an 8 to 12-hour mission, and the gyro was never off more than 650 feet when we landed, without any updates during the flight. So they're pretty good.
When you're carrying bombs or missiles on the wings, do you have to release them symmetrically, or does that affect, because of the load, if you fire off of one wing, does it affect the attitude of the aircraft?
Oh yeah, if one wing went, you would feel that laterally. And by the way, the wing tanks, which are 3,000 on the older aircraft, were 3,000-gallon tanks, and they're aft of the center of gravity. There's another experience I had with that. With the H model, it's only 700 gallons, and it's basically there for stability as against fuel. Okay, a couple other things that have changed. Obviously, the command structure has changed. That was important. So now where it had been Strategic Air Command and the aircraft belonged to SAC, and SAC never released them. So they remained under SAC control, and whatever they were doing, SAC was in the loop. And they've had strike requests could take anywhere up to 2 to 3 weeks from the time of the request before it actually got out to the wings to do something, just because of the route it had to take through MAC-V, up to SAC, back to 3rd Air Division, eventually down to the wing. Now, it's the Global Strike Command. And so now that's a component command. So the aircraft becomes subordinate to whatever command they're supporting, to include the Navy. And so as an example, if they happen to be supporting the fleet, they're under the command of CINCPAC Fleet. And they are used for that purpose. They provide long-range eyes for the fleet. And this allows the Navy observation aircraft to handle the stuff that gets closer in. And 2 B-52s can cover 140,000 square miles of ocean in 2 hours from a searching standpoint. So they're at altitude up. But they also carry the weapons, anti-ship weapons, so they can also fire at those also. Now, you were talking about capacity. So they run this exercise. They have 2 B-2s, and 2 B-1s, 2 B-52s, smart weapons. They take out 200 targets with those 4 airplanes. So I don't even know if they know dumb weapons anymore, quite frankly. So the tactics have changed immensely. So, as I said, they support the Navy, and for whatever reason, they're down here flying alongside of carriers. It's beyond me. Well, clearly, this guy over there is showing off. And yes, indeed, for you in the back of the room, they can get down at low altitude. And by the way, when we started the low altitude tactics, they modified the aircraft to have terrain following radar and radar altimeters, which we didn't have before that.
Radar altimeters don't work over water very well.
Well, you don't even care about, nothing works very well over your eyeballs, work over the water.
Yeah. And your adrenal glands.
Yes. So here's what some of the pundits think that we don't have, a hypersonic missile.
Oh yeah, we don't have those.
This is a Mark 183, and it was, the program was canceled, which is true, because of the early failures that it had. But the last 2 launches were indeed effective, successful, hit their targets. And in the literature that somebody who has no authority whatsoever can read, they would only say that it was somewhere in excess of Mach 5. And developments underway for other aircraft, other weapons. And as you're probably well aware of, there's top secret type development going all the time. The U-2 was actually, we had about 20 of them built before the public even knew we had any. That same thing happened with the SR-71 and the F-111. I don't know what the Navy programs, because I haven't been exposed to them, but down at the Army, during the time after I became a civilian working for IBM, I was the program manager for Reagan's Star Wars program, building the battle management's command control system, and had to work with the Army. And the ground-based anti-satellite weapons, and they had them at that time that they were working on that were successful, and that led to some of the missile defense systems that we have out today, basically to target. And I think the one on the Navy ship is pretty much like the one that the Army has, the THAAD, I think. But I don't know for sure, because you don't get to know all that secret stuff. But that's like shooting down a bullet with a bullet, and that's what you do if you defend against a hypersonic weapon. You're going to shoot a bullet with a bullet. They have been successful at killing missiles with lasers. You basically burn the guidance system up. And they did have a test program, which is, I don't think it's working now. They were hoping to go like that. The C-130 gunship would have a laser weapon on it. So, as I said, things are we're progressing. That's it.
All right.
So if you got any questions,
Excuse me, these are manufactured by Boeing?
what, the B-52?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are they still manufacturing them?
Oh, the last one was built in 1963.
Oh, okay, so they're still, the old,
The new one is expected to be built by Boeing, though, isn't it?
Well, it isn't new, it's just, they just upgrade an existing airframe.
Is that already approved, the J model?
They've got some money in the budget for it, yes. But you got a new administration coming in. And Musk is going to have everything go to drones and get rid of airplanes. So,
Are all of the H's gonna be turned into J's, or there's?
no, just 56 of them.
Pardon me?
56,
Okay, and the rest will still be H's?
yeah.
Want to make the point, you notice the 9 and the 8 on those signboards there. That shows you the B-52 is not a short takeoff and landing aircraft. That 9, it has 3 zeros added to it in your mind. It means 9,000 feet of runway remaining if you're going from left to right, and it shows 8,000 on the other side. So it took that guy, and is that at Omaha, at Offutt?
No, it's not Offutt. I don't know where that is either.
We had a 1.5 mile takeoff run approximately, maybe a little less to get.
3 quick stories about takeoffs. One is in the B-47. We gave an F-104 pilot a ride back in the B-47. Just about the time we broke ground, he hits the mic and said, "You know, I have sorties that are shorter than this."
Then I have a question to follow up.
The other story was on a minimum interval takeoff where we took off 15 seconds apart. and I'm flying the lead. It's no-go dry, so if you don't have water injection, you can't get off the runway. Right at decision speed, and when we're committed, the water quits. So it sounds like the engine shut down. It's quiet as heck, but you're committed. So we were charging down. And that navigator, his mic says, it sure is quiet in here. And then the gunner comes online. He said, you ever see a buff coming up your ass? So I got off the ground over the overrun, just barely cleared the fence, ruddered slightly to the left, and number 2 went by me, and number 3 went by me before I got gear and flaps up. But I'm riding down on ground effect, trying to get the aircraft up to speed.
What's that about the water? I don't get the connection.
Water injection increased the thrust of the engines by about 20 or 30%.
It's like afterburner.
But there's only so much before that. Now, the G model aircraft, where the runway at Dow at Bangor, Maine, was a little short. When we were fully loaded, we actually had to pull the aircraft off the ground before takeoff speed and just kind of sit there in ground effect while it's accelerated to takeoff speed. So that's my 3 short stories.
You're not going into Midway with one of these?
No, you're not.
Okay, this is a question that I've been dying to ask you, but keep forgetting. During Linebacker 2, Christmas week, 72, you're flying downtown Hanoi, Haiphong, most heavily defended area in the world. SAC for a long time with B-52, my understanding was that they believed that the electronic countermeasure tactics more or less made a cell invulnerable to attack by SAMs. Is that a true statement?
Well, they kind of thought that might be the case.
So I just learned today that cell meant trail formation. I
Yeah.
thought it was some kind of a box that gave me more electronic countermeasures. So anyway, I had a backseater in the Guard, in the Nebraska Guard, that had flown in Linebacker 2 out of Anderson at Guam. And he said that it was a virtual mutiny. That the crews, after they lost so many airplanes in those first attacks, said, no, we're not going tomorrow. And it was a big brouhaha there at Anderson.
Yeah.
And then that's when SAC said, okay, well, we're gonna change the tactics, different run-ins, different altitudes, different stuff.
I think that occurred, so I heard. But I think their motivation was different. I think he had 4 stars, and he was really, really upset.
Yeah, but he had the backing of a lot of the crews.
Oh, yeah. Well, he had a backing of everybody. I mean, it was dumb, but there's a lot of dumb things that were done.
But before that, the tactics, electronic countermeasure tactics, led those first Linebacker 2 attacks or missions to be flown on SAC's long relied upon electronic countermeasure plan.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. But you couldn't get everything. And then, of course, that was another issue with the G models. The G models weren't designed to take care of these antiquated electronic systems. So they couldn't even counter those SA-2s that they had in North Vietnam. So a lot of the shooting at the North Vietnam, pardon?
SA-2s and 3s.
A lot of their shooting was done just because they knew where the airplane was going to be.
Right.
What altitude?
Predictability.
I only flew one mission where Sam got shot at me that I knew. And it went off the left wing, and it did not explode, which is good news, right?
Yes.
That was another one of the moratoriums. We were along the DMZ and they were firing from across the border. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Yes.
One?
You mentioned working with the Navy. How often did branches work together? Was that common or?
Yeah, well, it's fairly common. You have to really get into the unified command structure for that. But people have to remember that the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, regardless of what we say, we don't fight wars anymore. The wars are all fought by unified commands. And the unified commands are a mix of the three of us. So.
Four.
Well, four.
Actually, 5 now.
5. Whatever. From a budgeting standpoint, 3.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
For coming, and I want to give you a heads up, if you're a member or planning on becoming a member, we have our annual meeting where we have all the members of the museum get together, and the individual directors make a report on our past year and what we're looking for next year. And that meeting is on January 11th. Saturday, it'll be right here. And so we'll have that meeting. At that meeting, we'll be electing the new board of directors, and we'll be confirming the budget for next year. We had a very good year this year as far as donations and progress. And so I hope you all will come out and give us a listen as to what we've done and what we're looking forward to next year.
What time will that be?
It'd be 10 o'clock here. 10 o'clock on Saturday, January 11th. Thank you again for coming, and if you haven't signed in, please sign in. Thank you.